Most adults I talk to try to give me answers. Jad Abumrad never does. He's the creator of Radiolab, a Peabody-winning show that basically reinvented what storytelling on the radio could sound like. He also made Dolly Parton's America and Fela Kuti Fear No Man, these massive multi-year projects where he disappears into a question and comes back with something no one expected. He's technically my professor at Vanderbilt, but what he's actually been is mentoring how to ask questions, how to sit with not knowing, and how to find meaning in the messiness. So I called him up because I wanted to understand, how did he create these things? And honestly, how can I learn to do that? I wanted a path forward, something very concrete. And that is not what I got. Instead of answers, he gives you a metaphor. Sometimes they hit immediately, but sometimes more quietly, and then they pop up weeks later when you least expect it. He told me he existed somewhere between sound and story and meaning. And when I asked about his process, he said sometimes the idea is already there, you just have to give it a minute. And I think you'll feel what I mean in this conversation. So to start with, I'm curious, how would you describe what you do these days creatively? Not the resume version, but how do you think about your creative identity?
I still tell stories on the radio and in podcast. Usually these are many year projects where I go off and I get interested in a question or a corner of the universe. And I try and talk to as many people as I can find and then make meaning out of it, once I feel I know something. So that's another part of what I do. I also do a lot of art theater projects, which is kind of what I was doing before Radiolab. And so that's another part of what I do. So I don't even know how to say that succinctly. That's kind of the problem. I guess if I had to say it in a sentence, I think I exist somewhere between sound and story and meaning.
So with this story and meaning part, how do you feel like it's changed throughout the years?
Good question. It's always, I've always been really privileged to be able to work on things I want to work on. And then, which means that, I'm always sort of interested in things that I don't understand. And that changes as you grow up, right? I mean, I started this work when I was not too much older than you know? And at that point, what I didn't understand had a lot to do with science. So I was doing a lot of science stuff, trying to find meaning in the science. And then that shifted over time, and then I became really interested in understanding America and the law. I created a whole project that was about the law because that was the thing. I was like, I don't really get how the law works. And I want to know. I want to understand it better. And then more recently, I have been really interested in music and culture and how music can hold our histories and our experiences. And so that led me to want to talk to Dolly Parton, and that project happened as a result. And then the Fela Kuti project is sort of more in that direction as well. So I feel like where I have been putting the spotlight of my attention has been shifting over the years, and just reflects growing up and continually having questions about the world, and where those questions land is different. But the general impulse has always been the same. It's I don't really get this. I feel like I missed this day in school. I want to understand and then that leads you to places.
So when you're thinking about these stories, is it more of following your own curiosity, or at what point do you have to think about audience?
It's sort of a feedback loop.
hmm
It begins with my own curiosity, and then instinctively, what I want to understand is, do other people know this, and I just don't? And often the answer is yeah, like people, this is not a mystery to other people. And I
Hmm.
let go of those. But often you hit on a question that actually everybody else is like, huh, that is a good question. And then you go away by yourself and try and explain it to yourself. And periodically you check in with the people around you, being like, guess what I discovered? What do you think of this? And you sort of measure their reaction. And that becomes feedback that lets you know, is this a question that's worth chasing? Or maybe this question is going to lead me to a better question. And so most of it is done in solitude, but you're always sort of like popping your head out of your bubble to ask the people that you trust around you to give you feedback. So for me, the audience is like always in second place, but it's a very important second place. Um,
Hmm.
and they can easily go to first place if I start to doubt that I'm on the right track at all, you know? But it's always sort of it's a negotiation, I would say.
Mm. On the topic of doubt, I think in previous podcasts you mentioned that sometimes you can use doubt as an engine. So I'm curious, what's the difference between doubt that pushes a project forward versus doubt that like kills it?
Yeah, these are good questions, Adele. I wasn't prepared for such deep questions. Um,
I've asked them later, but
let's see. What is the difference between doubt that is propelling versus doubt that it shuts it down? Huh. The doubt. Okay, so like one of my core beliefs, like yeah, one of my core beliefs is like in this idea of small t truth. We all have our own small truths, and often those conflict. Not to say there isn't like an objective truth. I just don't think any of us will ever get there. So the good doubt, the generative doubt comes from just recognizing that what you believe may not be shared by other people, you know? And so constantly sort of being curious about how other people are defining their truths and measuring all the truths against one another and seeing if you can make something out of it, seeing if you can get somewhere with that. The kind of doubt that can be really toxic and difficult that unfortunately holds hands with the good doubt is the kind that's where you're always questioning yourself, where you're always doubting that you can do the job, and that doubt can sometimes turn into fear, and that fear can sometimes be just a lot to deal with. Probably they come from the same source. So part of what I am always paying attention to is that sometimes the fear can hook you with questions that are actually legitimate questions. You know, oh, you're never going to get this done, Jad. Why did you even think that you could do this? You're such an idiot. Now, that's fear. And so in some sense, you just kind of have to put that on your shoulder and let it claw at you and not pay attention to you. But it is asking a question that is true. Maybe you can't do this. Maybe this is beyond you, you know? And so I find I have to sort of decouple the actual question from the monster that is using the question for its own benefit. So a lot of it is about just like being, yeah. So it's like differentiating between the different kinds of doubt, knowing that one is actually asking legitimate questions about the world and asking you to see outside your own brain. And the other one is sometimes just being hijacked by the monster that's always there.
so I'm thinking about what you mentioned with like decoupling the two. And I'm curious, are there other like systems or habits you have when you fall back on when dealing with doubt, or fear or feeling stuck in general?
Yeah, habits. Uh, I often find when I'm stuck or when I'm feeling not confident. Sometimes it's really just about stopping what I'm doing and like going for a run, you know, or really paying attention to like where is my weight? Am I like are my feet on the ground? You know, it's like just trying to get back into my body in a way, like because I like someone I find it very easy to dissociate, you know, and to get very much in my head. And so sometimes it's just about getting out of your head and back into your feet and getting just and walking and those kinds of things. So I tend to be really simple when I'm stuck. Go to the gym or go for a run or something simple that just like gets me back in my being rather than in some series of thoughts. Usually at the end of those runs, I have a new perspective. I have a new idea. If I'm really struggling, I will talk to somebody, you know? If I'm like I do sort of just believe that like if I'm really, really struggling these days, I used to be like I would just do it all myself. I'll get through this. I'm a little bit more humble about it now, and like if I'm struggling, I will find someone who I can talk to.
On that note, I'm really curious about how it's like to work on with a team creatively, and how do you sort of go about to choose and build that team?
Working with a team is something I had to learn. Um, I began by working solo on everything and doing all parts of the process. And then I had a couple of collaborators early, and it was hard. And they like figuring out how to share with them, share the work process was difficult. And then particularly as when the team got really big, I really had to think very strategically about how you collaborate. Organizational questions that I ignored for years. Now I take those questions really seriously. So I think what it means to be in a team and to be a collaborator, particularly like in a creative thing where like everybody's putting their heart and soul into it, and it's like everyone's like it's like we're putting all of us into this work. I think it's then just about like what are our agreements, you know, and being really um, simple but explicit with those agreements early. That's what I've learned over the years, so that nobody's feelings get hurt and that everybody feels like we're working towards something.
Hmm. Do you feel like um working towards something and the motivation from it needs to be like intentionally cultivated? How do you go about like doing that?
Yeah, I do think I think there's some people who are just really good at like just being contagious. Um, like maybe they have a passion or a curiosity or enthusiasm for something and they just kind of hook you with that. Um, but even those people, and I think everybody at some point you do need to cultivate it. And what I mean simply is like it can't just be in one person's brain, you know, like whatever it is that you want to do, like you need to communicate that as a separate set of objectives that's not just about like, oh, I want to make Adele happy, right? So I want to accomplish whatever she wants to accomplish. That's an interpersonal thing. I think better and healthier is if you say, I, Adele, have these objectives and I would like to accomplish them. Do you buy into this? And if I say yes, then I'm buying into something that isn't you. It's a third thing. It's a separate thing. And I think all relationships work better when there's a third element to them, where you're like both triangulating a third thing and not each other. And yeah, that has to be cultivated. It has to be put into words that feel good. That's a hard process to
Hmm.
like define your objectives in a way that feels like it still has the magic, but it's clear, you know? That's a hard thing, and it takes people years sometimes to get to that place. But I think that's where healthy collaborations live.
Hmm. So how did that look like when you were working on podcasts that maybe the storyline isn't like it's like built when during the process of making it?
Yeah. Well, for a long time, I mean, early days Radiolab, and I mean like for the first 7, 8 years, it was really hard. I had to like take drafts from other people and remake them. And then I would be like, okay, now it sounds like how I want it to sound like. And they would often agree, but like, yeah, okay, I see what you're doing. But nobody wants their things to be taken from them and then remade.
Hmm.
That doesn't feel good. And so I figured out too late that you really do need to take a step back and be like, okay, what am I actually doing to achieve the sound that sounds good to me? What are the principles at work here? And how can I explain that to people? And that still doesn't mean that they may necessarily know how to do it exactly the way I want, but at least I can now tell them in a way that doesn't seem like I'm just being a prick. Do you know what I mean? So it like that yeah, so like there was a period, there's always going to be a period where it's hard for you to explain what it is you're after, and you just kind of have to do it. But if you're really committed to the thing you're making, at some point you need to step back and be like, what am I doing? What is this? Um, Often the idea is in there and it just needs to emerge, and so you have to give it a minute. But as soon as it comes up, you do need to sort of name it um, in a way that allows you to talk about it with other people.
So, how did you talk about it, or like describe what you wanted it to sound like in the early days of Radiolab when there wasn't necessarily like a sample because it was like innovative?
In the early days,
Yeah.
I don't know that I talked about it very well, you know? Um, I remember in the very early days, like super early, before it really was I mean, before it really caught a wind. I remember I was really into This American Life, you know, really the godfather of all podcasts. And I liked the way that they told stories that were personal and emotional and surprising. And I liked the way they used music. I had a sense that there was a different level that I could get to where the music was much more of a character and much more cinematic. And that the storytelling maybe had a lot of information in it. So I had those instincts, but I didn't quite know how to put it all together. I remember I started collaborating around that same time with a guy named Robert Krulwich, who was a longtime broadcaster, wonderful improviser. And we were doing at one point, I wanted to do a show about memory. And I had scheduled an interview with a memory scientist. I think I actually had done the interview. And I remember Robert came in, listened to the interview, and we were in the studio, and he starts telling me what he understood about the interview. And his tell was so much more interesting than the scientist because the scientist was talking about in a jargon and really dense language. And Robert was telling it in a very playful way. And so I remember going back to my office and I had a recording of Robert telling me the story. I had a recording of the scientist telling me the story. And I remember I cut them against each other. And then I did a little bit of sound design because in one of Robert's riffs he talked about like a scenario of like a rabbit in a garden. What does the rabbit remember about the garden? He had a whole thing. And I remember so I made a little sound world of a rabbit in a garden. And I remember I put the three next to each other. The sound world, the scientist, Robert. And I played like a 4 minute thing for him the next day. And I remember we were both listening to it and we were like, oh, that's weird. That just sounds different. Didn't understand what it was really, but I was just like, oh, that's a whole new thing. Like I wasn't trying to make a new thing. I was just putting three things together. But then there was this recognition the next day. You're like, oh, that's new. There's just something about the way that the layers all bled together, which was just interesting. So we kept trying to do that. Sometimes we'd hit it right. Sometimes we'd go way off because we didn't really understand what it was. You were just sort of searching through the dark a little bit. And for a long, long time, like I couldn't tell you what it was we were doing. I could tell you that it was personal, it was funny, it was experimental, it was weird noises. Um, so it was kind of sound arty, but also just like really funny and chatty. So there was like chatty meets sound art, improvisation meets editing. Um, Sometimes it was very theatrical. So it was very personal, but also theatrical at the same time. There was just like this series of tensions that I kind of like vaguely understood, but I couldn't tell you how to make it. I couldn't tell you like what were the ingredients. And and it was only much later that I sort of like came up with a whole schema for how to talk about the thing. And even that was vague, but it was slightly clearer than what I just said to you. So yeah, I don't even remember your question at this point. What was your question?
I think you answered what I was trying to get at.
Oh, okay, okay, good.
Huh. So how did you formalize it to like what was the schema like?
The schema was simply and here's where the audience comes in, right? The schema was like, what are the impacts I want to have on an audience?
Hmm.
Like you're listening to something I make, Adele, let's imagine. What are the five emotions I want you to have? Like literally, okay, maybe I want you at some point to be like, huh, turn your head kind of this way.
Hmm.
Okay, that's a thing I want you to experience. I also want you to experience a moment of like, huh, like something sinks in. And maybe I want you to have a moment of like, whoa, where it's like a sense of awe and wonder, right? So those are things, right? Those are specific beats that I need you to experience. So how am I going to do that? And so then like if even if you just list the things I want you to experience, then I could talk to somebody and be like, yeah, I'm not getting the huh. I'm getting a lot of what, but I'm not getting the other thing.
Hmm.
And that becomes a language you can use to talk about storytelling, you know? It's like hitting one note, but it's not hitting the other. So how do we do that? And there are a million ways to hit that note, right? So that's where you can kind of get too prescriptive. Because I could tell you a story that makes you go, whoa, 4,000 different ways, right? So there is no one way to do that. But there is that reaction that we're all heading to. And like, how do we get to that? So I began to define it from the outside in, just in terms of the things I need you to experience. And that became a way to talk about it. That became the schema.
Hmm.
It's a little bit like symptoms of a disease in a way, but the positive aspect of that,
Hmm.
um, you know,
That's so skillful. That makes me just wonder, like, do you feel like you ever carry those like storytelling techniques into your real life, like subconsciously? Um,
yeah, I mean, I do, sure. In a way, I look for those same things myself, right? Just out in the world, I want to feel wonder. I want to feel intrigued. I want to feel horrified, all of these experiences that a story can elicit from you. Those are just things I want, those needs. And what is interesting, what your question makes me think is that in the telling of stories and in becoming the guy who tells the stories, it has opened up in me personally all of those things, I don't know that I was a very curious kid. Like I just wasn't. I didn't feel like I had permission to ask questions. But now it's like all I do. It's like part of my personality. And I think it was always there, but the work brought it out and it opened me up to it. And similarly, I need to feel like wonder. I need to feel like things mean something, you know? And I don't know that I was that kid, but I am that person now. I am that adult. And so, yeah, the work has permeated all aspects of my life at this point.
So how does it feel like to find wonder right now, or when there's a lot of like fear mongering, like algorithms on the internet?
It's a good question. It can feel it can feel like there's too much happening to want to actually see anything beautiful or wondrous. It can almost feel like you're not allowed. But I actually feel like sometimes I feel like it's a political act to put your attention towards something beautiful, towards something hopeful, actually feels to me like a small act of rebellion right now. Not simply because there's a flood of cynical bullshit, but because the algorithm itself is like psychological amphetamines. It's trying to sort of juice you towards what is horrible and conflicting in the world. It's
Mm.
trying to sort of highlight all the differences, rather than sort of pointing at what we share. So I actually feel like it's the first thing to go. But I mean, just like, no, there's the funny, I have the book right over here somewhere. I'm looking and I can't remember what it's called. It's a book written by a Buddhist monk, I believe. He talks about being in a war zone
Mm.
and the entire building, the entire neighborhood was bombed. And he somehow miraculously survived. He crawls out of this wreckage and he sees on a small patch of land a little bit of grass and a flower growing. And just like it was the most beautiful thing he's ever seen in his life. Like he writes really beautifully and poetically about seeing that one flower amidst the chaos. And to notice that flower doesn't actually change the nightmare that's unfolding, but it's rebalancing in some way, you know?
Mm.
It shows you that that's not all there is, that there is something else that's still beautiful and precious. It's a little bit like during COVID. I remember walking through the park and the birds, the sound the birds made had a completely different feeling to them. I was like, oh, these birds don't care. And that's amazing. You know, these birds are just being birds. Like the good things that are in the world still continue and they still persist along with the bad. And it is important that we notice that. It is important that we place our attention on that. So, so yeah, I don't know. That's where my mind goes.
Mm. That just reminded me because I was locked in Shanghai during COVID.
Mm,
And then when my mom and I finally like came out after a few months, like we just saw all the animals come out where there used to be people. It was just yeah, it just reminded me of
yeah. Like cats and dogs and things or
like
what?
squirrels. There used
Yeah.
to be never be squirrels.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of it's profound, you know?
Hmm. I want to talk a bit about like the attention economy and um like how you feel like this like sound story the place of that in the attention economy has changed, and how do you think about distribution and audience like with the shifting context?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I'm thinking a lot about right now, you know? I mean, everything is shifting in my world. Just 3 years ago, you know, so podcasting, I was part of the first wave of podcasting. You know, I was part of a small group of shows that really created podcasting. And most of those shows, well, there were, you know, I don't want to sort of be reductive. I mean, there was a lot of different podcast worlds. Like there was comedy, like Joe Rogan's been around since the dawn of time. Um, but there was this other ecosystem that I was a part of that was, you know, like true stories told in a kind of cinematic nonfiction kind of, you know, like narrative way. Uh, that used to be so much of podcasting. And now it's kind of shrunk very, very dramatically to where most podcasts are, celebrities talking to their friends or like dudes on a couch talking about dude things. Um, and there's just like the world of which I was a part has really shrunk just in the 3 years. Uh, and I say 3 years because my latest project took 3 years to make. So I was watching the industry change as I was making this last project.
Wow.
So it does raise a question about audience. Like, is the audience still there for the kind of work I want to make? I don't really know. Probably, but I'm not sure. Certainly, everything has gone very video, you know, and uh, and that's a real shift that I have to sort of think about. Um, but the way I process it, it's literally just before you, I was having breakfast with somebody, and I found myself saying it, and it felt true that, I started this work back when I was, again, not much older than you, and I didn't think it was going to make any money. It was just the thing I felt called to do. And then suddenly I made a show that caught a wind and then I was making money and it became like my life. And it created, I mean, I bought this house with the money I made from the show. And that was amazing. And that lasted for 20 years. And it could be that it's going back to the beginning in a way that it's going to be more of a passion and not the thing that makes me money. And I will be doing a million other things like teaching at Vanderbilt, for example, that
Mm.
that will help me pay the bills. But the my heart will always be in this work. Whether or not it makes me money is it's an important question, but it is actually a secondary question because my heart will always be tethered to the process of doing this work, which is, what does that mean? It means going out, being open to the mysteries and complexities of the world, asking questions, never for a second thinking that you know what's true or somebody else knows what's true. You all have your own small t truths. And the whole idea is to try and navigate between that. And the truths are always intersubjective, it's contained between people. Um, but yet you have to dig and report until you find something that feels interesting and true to you, what we call meaning. And then I try to communicate that to somebody. That process, everything I just said to you, that for me is like finding religion. Every time I do a story, like a really big story, and I find the center, I feel like I found religion in some way.
Mm.
Um, I will always do that work, whether or not it gets thrown into the world as a commodity. That's hard for me to say because that, in many ways, I don't control that. You know what I mean? Like that so many other forces beyond me have something to say about that. So it may be that the thing I've been doing my whole life becomes just a passion for a minute, and then maybe it transposes into some other thing. I don't know. But I'll always do it.
Do you think the core of your work is in the process of you finding the question, or like how much, like, or did you consider the format? Like, have you ever considered trying to go with the mainstream format?
I can see in your question, I mean, I don't want to turn this on you, but in talking to you, I have noticed a real series of questions around your desire to, your passion to do something and what you think the world will reward you for.
Mm-hmm.
Which, of course, like that's a question we're all grappling with, but I wonder how do you feel you're living that question right now?
Um, I don't know. I think like it's like I'm trying to find voices and people that don't care about how the world or will like the reward part because I feel um like the way is to like stick to it and then because that would be truthful, but I'm still not sure how to answer that question
Hmm.
because I don't know like at what length or like at what part of my life I would want to live truthful. Maybe like if I focus on where we're now, I'll like get more freedom later, but I feel like that's like something everyone sort of
Mm,
thinks about. Um, but I don't think I'll choose like the obvious answer. So that's why I'm like
mhm.
trying to find new answers.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's what you're doing with this series?
Yeah, I think of part of like a bit part, yeah.
Nice.
So
Okay, back to you. Back to you.
on that on that kind of does lead me to the next question is like how how did you think about impact and reach like through different stages and with different projects that you worked on?
Yeah, I mean, I could lie to you and say that I didn't think about it and that I just ignored it, but no, I mean, at every stage, like I feel like there's two things pulling at you. There's like one is like your own selfish need to figure something out. And then there's the other part that's like, I really want the world to bow down and or applaud. You know, there is always that voice in your head. Um, it's not as if you're doing this just for yourself, but the selfish part is always the first part in a way. It's always like the lead horse. Then one of the horses is always like, no, go for the applause, go for the applause. Um, and I just learned to recognize them for what they are, which are different instincts in the gaggle of horses that are pulling the chariot in a way. Um, and so you know, you just recognize that, oh, I am a bundle of competing instincts. There is a part of me that really does want people to notice. And you know what? That part, there's a part of you that's not like a, you know, that's not an ugly thing. That's like, you want to communicate, you know? I mean, for me, Gen X, right? I'm a Gen X. Like the idea of selling out, it was the worst thing in the world. Like, no, never, never. So like part of what you're hearing is my generational baggage, you know? I don't think your generation has quite the same hangups about it as that mine does. But but yeah, there's a part of you that just wants to connect with people, get followers, so to speak. Uh, but then there's the other the horse that's always in the lead is the one that's just like, oh, I just really want to figure this out. Like I need to figure this out. And you know, that's the one that's going to be pulling the chariot. I think that there are other people have different configurations for the instincts that pull them, but it's always many. It's always like a plurality of instincts. I think about it as a very important, necessary engine, but it's not the primary engine. For me, it never has been. Um, it would feel really lonely and stupid to be asking questions and trying to answer them just for myself, but I think I would do it if there was nobody else around. Um, so yeah, reach and impact. And I will say this though, like in terms of trying to figure out how to tell the stories, you're always thinking about impact.
Hmm.
Whether or not it actually happens the way you imagine it is again, that's the part where you just have to kind of let go of it. But I'm trying to build these stories in a way where they move you. So I am thinking about the vague, amorphous you that's going to hear the stories. Um, but yeah, reach is hard. Reach is hard. In many ways, it's not in your control. Um, and there are going to be long periods where you're making a thing, and I'm speaking specifically to you and people your age, where you are making a thing and you're not having any reach. And there are going to be long periods where the place where you're working that could have a lot of reach, it's not actually the kind of impact you want to have, you know?
Hmm.
I mean, God knows there's so many people who have reach, and what are they using their reach for except to pollute our brains? You know? There's a lot of that happening. Um, Spotify has great reach. But what the fuck are
Hmm.
they doing for the world? They're devaluing music and they're
Yeah.
driving artists into bankruptcy. So their reach is not exactly positive. Um,
Hmm.
so, you know, you have what impact do you want to make? and what reach can you have doing it are sometimes two separate questions. The impact should be feel very pure, and the reach is a thing you can hope for and work toward and hopefully get to. But you know what? If you don't, as long as your impact and your motives are pure, I still think you win in the end.
Mm.
Uh, I didn't plan on working on it for that long. It was more just organically the process ended up that way. I got approached. So as I was walking away from Radiolab, I got approached by a friend of mine who I've known for years, who had struck up a friendship with a person who worked with the Kuti family. And
Mm.
so he asked me, they asked me, I should say, like, do you want to make a thing on Fela Kuti? I was like, oh yeah, I've always loved Fela's music. Didn't know much about him, so I started making calls. Even before we had made the decision to do the podcast, I was started making calls. I worked with a great researcher, and she and I started making calls, and then I just didn't stop. It's like a year into the process, we still did not know if it was going to be a podcast. Like it had not found a home. There was no distributor who was like, we will put it out into the world. And yet I was still making calls, you know? And so like a whole year of the 3 years was really just spent in this state of research, not knowing if it was going to be a real thing. Then when it got signed on and it found a home, we took it more seriously. We started creating schedules, went off to Lagos and Abeokuta, and we traveled around Nigeria, and then came back, and then we spent a year making it, just cutting the tape. And it was a very small team of people doing that, just myself and 2.5 producers, you know,
Mm.
and an editor who's the guy who initially got me into this. And the planning of it and the making it make sense part was really just this very iterative process of like you do the interviews, you have a question, you do the interviews, you see what you get back, you listen to the what you get, you choose the best bits, and then you just let them lead you because inevitably there's things you don't know that you want to know. There are questions that come out of those moments that you want to pursue. And then you start finding stories and scenes, and then you start thinking about it as almost like a movie producer, like, oh, what are the big scenes that I can have? What are the questions attached to each scene? So you start to like go into a movie process,
Mm.
like a storyboarding process, and that guides things. And then you sort of step back and you look at all the different pieces and you're like, what am I missing? And so then you go in a different direction to pull in some history or some politics that you haven't done. Then you start to think about like the series should have like 5 or 6 arcs to it. There's the arc of Philo's life. There's the arc of the idea of what does it mean for art to be political? Like there's that whole question that has an arc to it. You start sort of thinking of like many arcs layered on top of each other, and you want to make sure that each arc has a beginning, middle, and end. So then you start to having that kind of conversation. Um, Yeah, it's like this making a series, like a many part series is a really strange trip, you
Mm.
know? It's just I would not recommend it. But it's a trip.
Hmm. Wow, it took a year of editing.
Yeah, and reporting and fact checking and all of the parts of the thing that happened at the end. Yeah.
Mm. How is it like when you finally release it to the world?
It's kind of I don't know. It's like usually up until this project, when I made series, like for example, Dolly Parton's America, we worked right up until the deadline every single episode because the episodes were weekly. So you would release one week and then you would work like hell to finish the next one and you'd finish it milliseconds before the deadline. And then you crash and then you work again for the next one, and then crash, and again for the next one. So if you're working like that, you're not actually paying it that much attention to what's happening when it gets released because you have so much to do. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how I worked with every series that I did. And so I missed it. I missed a lot of it.
Hmm.
This was the first series I think I've ever made where I had to finish all of them at once. So I turned in everything really almost a month before it was released out to the wider world. So this is the first time I actually got to watch it. And that was a weird experience. You know, like you put it out initially and you're like, ta-da, here it is. And it's just crickets and like no one really, because it takes, especially like there's so much stuff out. Like the podcast world is so saturated. You could be Kim Kardashian and release a podcast and it would still take a minute for people to find it. Um,
Hmm.
I'm not sure why her name came up, but like but it's like, it's just really hard to get an audience. So like there was crickets at first and then couple of critical reviews. People are like, cool, I like this. And then you're like, oh, and then you can see it slowly build. And the weekly rollout of the podcast, I should say we finished everything and then they get doled out on a weekly basis to the audience. That's almost done, but I feel like the podcast is just now breaking through and poking its head up. Um, so it's been really interesting to watch how it's introducing itself to people. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's like, you get these anecdotal feedback and people seem to love it. And that feels really good, you know? And like all I ever wanted with this particular series was for people who I really care about to like it. And that has happened.
Mm-hmm. Then how did it feel like when you wrapped up the Dolly Parton podcast?
It felt that one too was a slow burn, you know? Uh, it didn't like race out of the gate. It took, I think the first episode got a lot of downloads. And then subsequent episodes got not that much, but then started to grow over time. And that's been a podcast that I think has kept growing. And so now it's sort of seen as this very important podcast, but at the time it was just like any other. Uh, so I don't think I recognized it as anything special. I mean, I was, of course, really proud of it and like amazed that Dolly Parton would talk to us, you know? But it's only when I look back on it, what is it, 7, 8 years later, that I see that it was an achievement, but it didn't feel like it at the time.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's anything that you wish you would have known like much earlier, um, if you were to go through like start from the beginning and like go into podcasts and like seeing all those shifts in the world and all of that?
Like, what do I wish I could tell myself?
Yeah.
I mean, this sounds so dumb, but I would tell young me to have more fun,
Hmm.
you know? Um, it's such a gift to be able to be interested in something and then figure it out and have that be your job.
Mm.
Like, what a crazy thing. There's so many people who don't get to do the thing they love. Um, and I wish I could tell the me from the beginning of podcasting to just like stick your head up every so often and like be amazed and be grateful and have fun, you know? There were long periods of where I was so stressed that I don't think I was happy. I was not having fun. And I'm really grateful for all that yielded, but I think it could have been a little funner along the way, you know?
Mm.
Um, that said, like the work has given me so much that it feels almost like silly to try and second guess it. But yeah, just like go out more,
Mm.
you know? I think that's what I would tell myself. You know? I mean, it's like, can I turn the tables on you for a second?
Yeah.
It's what I feel like I want to tell you and the other students that I work with. It's so hard to be your age. And I don't say that with any condescension. It's like, it's fucking hard. There's so many things you have to figure out for yourself, and you're stuck in a world that is literally on fire. It's not a good time. It was never a good time, but it's definitely not a good time. So it's really hard, but but certainty is always the enemy, you know? And so it's like just somehow find a way to party with the doubt, party with the uncertainty, and just be happy with it, because you'll be much happier later in life if you don't grab the first certain thing that pops in front of you, but you sort of live the questions, which is what you're doing in this series, which is why I think it's great.
I went into this wanting a path forward, and I came out with more thoughts and more questions than I started with. You see, Jad never gave me a direct answer, but I think that was the point. The conversation didn't really hand me something conveniently. They shifted the way I saw things, and I think that's what this whole podcast has been, honestly. Not answers, just better questions and people generous enough to sit with me and share their life story.